Good morning and welcome to the Rector's Forum. As luck would have it, I am the Rector. My name is Mike Kinman. My pronouns are he, him. It is wonderful to be here. If you are new to this community, we'd love to learn more about you. There are green contact sheets by each of the doors. We'd love to have you fill out your information. We'd love you to turn and wave at the camera. We've got lots of people streaming us online or watching us in the future on YouTube. It's great to have you all here. I'm assuming you know where the bathrooms are where you are, but when you're here, the bathrooms are around the corner and to the right. Another thing that I want to bring to your attention is our action table over here. Loren's at our action table. We put our faith into action always at All Saints Church, and every week we pick one action to be our focus for courageous justice in the world. This week, there are two pieces of legislation that are going in front of the California State Assembly that have to do with preserving, frankly, the small amount of affordable housing we have. One of them will mandate that landlords have to let people know the reason that they are evicting them before they evict them. Believe it or not, that's not something they have to do right now. The other thing will prevent renters from huge rent increases, which is another way that landlords evict tenants and are able to make housing less affordable, is they just jump the rent immediately up so high that they know that people can't make that, and it's a de facto eviction from the property. So this will build in protections for renters about how much in a jump that the rent can go up. So it's really important. Loren is there. If you don't know who your state assembly person is, she's got a great little book that can look up your zip code and tell you who your state assembly person is. So please, please, please go do that. At all times, we so appreciate your giving at All Saints Church in so many ways, and appreciate the generosity of this community, both here and around the country and around the world. And so thank you for your generosity. We still have some folks who haven't pledged for 2019. It is never too late. We can get you a pledge card. You can go online. And for those of you who are streaming or watching this later, if you're streaming, there's a big donate button, like right about here. Down there, just click on it. It can take you to a pledge form. It can take you to a way to make a special gift. If you want to continue to support the ministry of All Saints Church, we are incredibly grateful for that. And I am absolutely thrilled to welcome Ani Zonnefeld to the forum today. We've been talking about our 4 core values of All Saints Church, being radical inclusion, courageous justice, joyful spirituality, and ethical stewardship. And as I was thinking about you, Ani, I'm like, wow, this is someone who just embodies all 4 of these things. And so it is so appropriate for you to be here at All Saints Church. Ani is a writer, a singer-songwriter, a speaker, a justice warrior, a human rights defender, a great cook. She's amazing. And she is the founder and executive director of just a transformational organization called Muslims for Progressive Values. And instead of me trying to say more about it, I'm just going to get out of here and ask you to welcome Ani Zonnefeld. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It is a great pleasure to be here, particularly at this church, renowned, well-known for its social justice activism. And I'm particularly touched by Mike's invitation for me to speak here at the forum. And for me, this church means a lot because you have always stood up for social justice. You've always championed and taken that route on your own, challenging apartheid system in South Africa when our U.S. government itself was in favor of the apartheid system. So I salute you, I salute your community, I salute this church. So it is my honor to be here. So what is Progressive Islam? It is a transformative organization, but before we do that, I'm going to actually start a song, and you are going to sing along with me where it says, ah, ah. In my soul there is a temple, shrine, a mosque, a church where I kneel. Prayer should bring us to an altar where no walls or names exist. Ooh, poured into itself becomes lost. Ha, 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 where the wing is fully lived but has no mind or body. In my soul there is a temple shrine, a mosque, a church that dissolves. That dissolves in God. So the title of my talk is What is Progressive Islam and Rebuilding a Progressive Muslim Movement Rooted in Human Rights. Can't hear me? Okay. So the most important word here is rebuilding, because what we're doing is rebuilding a progressive movement that started at the inception of Islam. And therefore, what we're doing is we're not reinventing Islam, but we're recreating what was supposed to be Islam. And rooted in human rights is really key, because there's a lot of talk in the Muslim world how the Human Rights Declaration, the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, actually is intended to undermine Islam, undermine Sharia law. So what we've done is we've interwoven human rights and Islamic human rights language, and so we are reinvigorating human rights in the Muslim societies, including here in the West, and particularly in the Muslim world, where the tyrants use this narrative that the United Nations is here to undermine human rights. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to challenge your understanding of Islam. We're going to hit the reset button. I'm going to challenge the thinking of what is supposedly Islam. I love this cartoon because it really, in the simplest terms, teaches you a few things and challenges you to think. And that is strange. I still can't find where it says blow yourself up and take as many of them with you as possible. And the second character goes, me neither. I also can't find where it says to kill your wife. It should say to hit your wife, actually. And the third person goes, hey guys, you sure this is the Quran? It's so simple, but this is the problem with how Islam is being practiced. And how did I get here? I'm going to start with something I'm going to show you a video, a 30-second commercial that is actually a real Google search. And a lot of times when something terrible happens in the world, the terrorist attacks happen, a lot of times we hear the question, where are the progressive Muslims? Where are the moderate Muslims, right? And then when Sultan of Brunei, makes a statement about stoning illicit sex, same-sex intercourse, and against apostates in his country, you only hear from non-Muslim voices. You hear George Clooney, you hear Elton John, you hear Ellen DeGeneres, the representation from Human Rights Watch, representation from Amnesty International. You do not hear a Muslim voice, and this is actually, the absence of a Muslim voice is actually very problematic, because it implies, it insinuates that Muslims actually agree with the Sultan of Brunei. And this absence of the Muslim voice from a faith perspective actually feeds into this anti-Islam, anti-Muslim sentiment in America. I wrote an op-ed condemning this decision by the Sultan of Brunei, and the only media outlet that would publish it was a small website in West Hollywood. None of the major American media outlets would publish the op-ed, including LA Times, all the supposedly progressive media outlets. So this is the challenge that progressive Muslims come up against. And so when people have this misconception about what Muslims look like and practice and what Islam really is, it has a lot to do with the perception as exposed, or what the media assumes Islam is. So I hope this works. Okay.
Jihad is long overdue. Let's go, Ummah, wake up, 'cause you and I have much to do. Ummah, wake up, our jihad is long overdue. Let's go, Ummah, wake up, 'cause you and I have much to do.
So, that music was by me. And so I did this Islamic Pop CD, and I was a songwriter, I was a closeted Muslim, a little bit of the background about me, Ani, beside being a cook and all that good stuff. But I actually I'm a songwriter, producer, and I was in the music business for 25 years, a closeted Muslim. And after 9/11, I decided that I needed to learn Islam for myself. I needed to either come out of the closet or disown it. And in order for me to do that, I needed to go on this learning journey. And I made a niyat, a promise, an intention, and that is, if I leave Islam as a result of this learning journey, then so be it. If I come closer to Islam as a result of it, then so be it. And what I found was the Quran was profoundly revolutionary for its time, 1400 years ago. It was actually egalitarian, and the practice of Islam and the mosque that I was in was a complete bastardization of it. Why are we practicing an Islam that is misogynistic and homophobic, and with no space for critical thinking, with no space for the right to think, to believe, the choice to believe? That's actually a mandate in the Quran. And it's actually the verse, Surah 2:256, there is no compulsion in faith, is actually one of the reasons why I am still a Muslim. Yeah. And so when you watch this video, and you think to yourself, well, this is actually a real major issue. And the reason the Quran was revealed 1400 years ago in Saudi Arabia was precisely because it was a society that was very tribal, that was incredibly brutal and misogynistic. And sadly, 1400 years later, it hasn't progressed that much. If anything, they have propagated this particular type of Islam, of misogyny and tribalism, to the rest of the Muslim world. So in 2006, in January, I decided to leave the community that I was a part of and start my own progressive Muslim community. Primarily because after doing the CD, none of the Muslim retail stores would sell it because, one, I was a female singer. And that therefore meant that my voice needed to be covered. You know, it wasn't just your skin, your hair, but your voice, your expression, everything else. So it's very much like Orthodox Judaism in that regard. And then you've got, the other reason was I used the full musical production, because that's what I did for a living. And that was forbidden because Prophet Muhammad only used the percussion. And so at that point, I was like, okay, I'm so done with this. I'm moving on. And I knew better too, because I'm born, raised Muslim from Malaysia. And so my upbringing was always egalitarian. My upbringing was always very affirming of my human rights and my gender, particularly from my father. And so when in 2004, in the United States, where I'm receiving this sort of misogynistic narrative, I'm like, no, this is unacceptable, because I know better. Because throughout history, the first converts to Islam were women, because it spoke to them, because it liberated the women. The first converts were also the slaves, because it also liberated them. It was the poor, it was the tribes that were below class, right? So faith, we have this common tradition. And so here in 2007, it officially started, and now we're in 8 cities in the United States. We are in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, Atlanta, New York, DC, Boston, hopefully soon in Houston, Texas, and Minnesota. And in other parts of the world, we've also grown because what we did really resonated, or what we do really resonated for many organizations, particularly in the West, where Muslims are minorities, and they're up against the Wahhabi-funded mosques and this intolerant interpretation of Islam. And so we've been nurturing these organizations. They've borrowed our 10 principles, they've translated it, and they've also adopted our form of advocacy that is using Islam as a tool of human rights. It's incredibly powerful, and I will tell you more about our international work. Our mission is, using faith language as a tool to empower women's rights, LGBTQ rights, freedom of expression, and freedom from belief. And since our inception, we've made our inroads into the United Nations, getting in the ECOSOC status, and we are a founding member of an Alliance of Inclusive Muslims, or AIM, and that was founded in 2017 in Tunisia, which included many countries and organizations from all over the world, from South America all the way to Southeast Asia. So our progressive Muslim movement is growing because what is happening in the Muslim world is unsustainable. The Muslim people are the ones on the receiving end of tyranny, of injustice, of terrorism. So our vision is really quite simple. Our exit strategy in the United States is when all of us have adopted our values and have become egalitarian and less homophobic and all that good stuff, we're good, at least in the United States. So, but what we've noticed is that since it was evident that Trump was going to be president, what we've noticed is a lot of the religious leaders and Muslim organizations in the US started rebranding themselves as progressive. And I can tell you, when we started in 2007, we were given grief for describing ourselves as progressive. And for us, the checklist is very simple. And if you are accepting of women as spiritual leaders, leading men and women in prayer, then you're progressive. If you are okay with LGBT people praying openly and coming to the space of worship, and just be, right? Be who you are, then you are progressive. But a lot of the times when it comes to LGBT, that's when they have a problem. So I'm sorry, you're not progressive. Right? So there's a lot of this borrowing of progressive language because that's the rebranding that's happening. But the question that we have to ask, and we have to challenge these institutions, so if you say you support women's rights, so what exactly do you do? Can women actually speak at the podium, at the pew that you do here? No. Can are LGBT people welcome? I mean, what is your program? Show me the money, from Tom Cruise. I always say that. Because show me what you've done. What is your programming to actually do away with this misogynistic teaching, this homophobic teaching, the othering of the other, whoever the other is? There's a lot of racism within our community, too, that we have to address as well. The Sunni that demonizes the Shia that demonizes the Sunni and the Shia that demonizes the Ahmadiyyas. I mean, the long lists, right? So to have a truly egalitarian space is actually not easy. People are so inherently tribal. And yet the Quran talks about, we have created you men and women in different nations and tribes so that you can learn from each other. And yet that is not what Muslims are doing, right? So that's why I'm still Muslim, because passages like that. So what does MPV do? So in the United States, we do a lot of advocacy, and I will talk about that in a minute. And at the United Nations, we basically challenge all the human rights abuses in the name of Sharia law by the Muslim majority countries, and they are so good at that. But it's really easy for us because we just do the counter-narrative. We file the reports in the UN mechanisms, particularly in the legal mechanisms that's been established, and we throw the words of the Quran back at them. You can't do anything. What, you're going to argue against the word of God? Right? So globally, we have, we've established AIM, but we have a phenomenal program called Imams, which I will talk about a little bit in detail. So our mere existence is an education for not just Muslims, but non-Muslims as well. And so we look at changing culture. And I'm really proud in the 10 years that Pew have been documenting and surveying American Muslims, the statistics is phenomenal in the shift of attitudes of American Muslims towards liberalism. In 2007, 27% of American Muslims support LGBT rights. In 2017, it's 52%. Yes. In 2017, 72% of American Muslims believe that Islam should be interpreted for the 21st century and for the society we live now. This is remarkable. And 72% of American Muslims actually find spiritual inspiration outside the mosque. So I'm also proud to share with you that there was an op-ed in the New York Times that actually highlighted the issue that MPV was the counterculture that has influenced the culture shift in American Muslims towards liberalism, and that traditional Muslims are so extremely fearful because they recognize that this cultural shift is permanent. I'm going to drill down a little bit on culture shift, and this is what's really, really important, is that we live in a democracy. We vote for members of our representatives that reflect our values, right? This is not just in the United States, but in many countries. EU is having their elections right now. This happens in a lot of Muslim countries as well. So the key thing is, how do you affect your individual hearts and minds in a way that is really truly egalitarian, that is non-tribal, that is beyond your selfish needs, but for the good of society, right? That only happens when you change each individual hearts and minds, and that is the culture shift that we work towards. So, for example, an international example is in Tunisia. The president was 93 years old, a liberal man, basically campaigned for equal inheritance for Muslim women and men. So it's been sitting in the parliament, it's been debated, and it's been debated until everyone's blue in the face, but nobody's willing to vote on it. And so basically it's dead in parliament. But what we're looking at doing is, the individual women themselves in the countryside of Tunisia do not believe that they deserve equal inheritance because they were told that the Quran doesn't support that. And so this is the problem that we have day in and day out in every society, is they are taught wrong. And this was my transformation, is that reading the Quran, and it's like, wait a minute, why can't women pray and read the Quran when they're menstruating? Why? Why can't Muslim women marry non-Muslim men? Why? I mean, we are the annoying, critical thinking kid. I'm sure we can all relate to that. Why? And we've been asking these questions and challenging the traditional mindset, the Imams, the religious leaders, and they don't have an answer because they know they made it up, because they know they have not been thinking critically in themselves, because they know they're just following what they have been taught. And they know are not teaching the truth. Now, the one very important thing that I teach you all today, and that is the difference between Sharia and Sharia law. I get asked this question a lot. Why is Sharia law, God's law in Islam, so unjust towards women? So there's two concepts here that's always conflated, conveniently conflated by our religious leaders and religious teachers. There's Sharia. Sharia in the Quran is described as the water that quenches your spiritual thirst. The water that quenches your spiritual thirst. That's how it's described. So it's a set of guidelines, not a laws, set of guidelines on how to live a good life. Be kind to fellow human beings. Be kind to earth, to the animals, etc. Then you've got Sharia law, which is a completely different construct. It's 100% man-made construct. It is not God's law. It is the extrapolation of understanding of the Quran by medieval men. by politicians, by religious leaders. And they conflate that and they mesh it up with social norms of the day, like female genital mutilation and cutting, forced child marriage, misogynist stuff, right? And so they mesh it all up and then they call it Sharia law. And against punishments against apostasy. If you leave Islam, it's death, punishment in whatever form they decide, right? And so this is what Sharia law. Sharia law is not God's law. How can it be God's law if it contradicts the Quran? It's as simple as that. You don't have to be a scholar to come to this conclusion, people. I get accused of, she's not scholarly enough. Like, I don't have to be a scholar to come to this conclusion. I actually argue with my very scholarly sister, who is a Sharia law lawyer, a graduate from Al-Azhar University, the Sunni institution, and she can't argue with me on this point. If it's God's law, why is it every time I go to Malaysia, every few years, the Sharia court changes its status on women's rights? God came down? If it's God's law, why is Sharia law different in Muslim countries? Why is apostasy punishable by death in Saudi Arabia and Iran and only punishable in Malaysia by brainwashing and fining and a fine, right? It's not. It's totally made up. And Muslims don't know that. So when you have these global status and statistics about Muslims wanting Sharia law, they don't know what Sharia law is because they are kept ignorant. So, if you get anything out of my talk this morning, just that, please. So, education. And that's what we're about, educate. Our advocacy in the United States, therefore, is rooted in education. This is very key. No Hate in My Faith is a new campaign that we're starting. And it's actually basically to challenge religious leaders and institutions, Muslim ones in the United States, to do away with the teaching of any form of hate of the othering. Done. We're done. It's enough. And it actually started with the No to Homophobia campaign after the Pulse shooting. And sadly, not a single Muslim institution signed on to it. So we are doubling down on this. The next thing is prevention and countering violent extremism. In the Muslim world, this is really key. How do we prevent extremism from taking root? And you have to do that only by using an egalitarian and inclusive Islamic human rights language. Ending female genital mutilation, cutting. It's not an issue just in some of the Muslim societies and Christian societies and animist societies. It's happening here in the United States. I don't know if you follow, but in Detroit, there was a case where the Bahra community, which is a Shia minority group, was doing female genital mutilation and cutting on 100 girls. The federal prosecutors charged them, but the case got dropped. Now, what's really interesting, that I really want you to all to pay attention to this, is that the Bohra community consulted with Alan Dershowitz, the very famous lawyer, about using the Religious Freedom Reformation Act. This act was meant to protect minority religious groups. But we are seeing that the right, whether it be Muslim or Christian, are actually using RFRA, Religious Freedom Reformation Act, to justify discrimination and abhorrent practices in the name of religion. So when you have your action plans and when you have your action advocacy work, challenge your representative on this issue, please. Because we in the progressive realm are clueless about this issue. But it's an issue here in the United States, and we have a Bohra mosque in the valley, too, that does practice this, just so you know. Ending child forced marriage, we have 16 with parental consent. You have all sorts of religious communities, conservative ones, where it be Orthodox Muslim, Jewish, Christians, that force their child into marriage. I get calls from lesbian young women who are forced into marriage because their parents discovered that they're lesbian. Right? So 16 with parental consent, but it's not parental consent, it's being forced by parents. And if you get the right judge who won't even bother to ask, hey, are you doing this out of your own free will? You're married. So this is also something to ask your government representative about. Promoting and supporting LGBTQI rights, we have lots and lots of resources that we've developed with, in partnership with Scholars of Islam. Chaplain endorsement is something we just started because we started recognizing there are some chaplains that want to have our progressive stamp of approval instead of a more conservative institutions because they themselves are progressive. So it's a way for us to work and change culture from within the system. Picture speaks 1,000 words. This is an example of how we pray. We pray Mecca style because in Mecca we don't segregate. So why do we segregate in the mosque? Just think about that. And then there's a documentary about my work, Al Imam, which I'm very proud to say that it was screened at the Cannes Film Festival just last Tuesday. And Her Islam, thank you, Her Islam includes everyone. It's actually I didn't make up that tagline, it's actually very nice, I like that. And so our Global Imams for Shia initiative is basically a network of imams, male imams, and male and female scholars of Islam and religious leaders. And basically, it's them that are at the forefront of countering a lot of the abhorrent practices within the community. And so we have this initiative in Burundi, in Tunisia, and now it's expanding to Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. It has been in Malaysia as well. And we work with local partners. So in Burundi, we have something called Clubs for She. We bring together young women 18 to 25 for a 4-night stay. Now imagine a conservative society where girls need to be home before sundown. We actually get these girls permitted to sleep at this camp with us, with the imams. And basically, the imams will teach them their human rights, their Islamic human rights. No, young women, you have the right to go to school, you have the right to marry, when you marry, who you marry, or not to marry. You have the right to work outside the home and to earn that income and to keep that to ourselves. These are values that are given, the rights given to us in the Quran 1,400 years ago that we're still fighting for. Right? That's the problem. And so these girls leave this sports camp, this leadership camp, invigorated, wings, you can see wings, and then you can see them flying, their eyes lit up, and they feel like they can now live a life, a real life for themselves. But once they leave, they also need to have the support of the imams, so that our imams are the local imams. They are not these high-flying imams, right? These are your local imams that preach, teach girls' and women's rights every week. We also have a radio program that's called Feminism in Islam that is actually done, this program is led by a male imam, and he's phenomenal. And so this is the sort of programming that we do at the local level in order to change people's hearts and minds and therefore culture. And this is an example, there's all this is on our website. This is an example of an imam. He's a Shia imam from Bahrain, and unfortunately he's been tortured and because he's a Shia and a Sunni governed state. So it's this, he goes in and out of prison all the time, bless his soul. And Alliance of Inclusive Muslims is the organization that we started, aim.ngo. And I'm very, very proud of this, but we are basically positioning ourselves as the progressive Muslim voice that will be confronting a lot of the tyrannical Muslim majority countries, particularly in at the United Nations. Collectively, they are known as the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the OIC, and they basically vote as a bloc. And so what we hope to do is to also vote as a bloc against them. I want to give room for questions, Q&A, so I'm just going to skip this. I'm going to sing you one more song. This one, when I talk about cultural change, one thing we don't have in the United States is American Islam, and so wherever we come from, we bring that culture from where we came from. And so I felt that as a singer-songwriter, one of the tools that I can do is to create a new culture. And this song, Prayer of Light, is actually Prophet Muhammad's favorite prayer that I set to classical music, and it's in English. And it's a way for us to develop our own spiritual worship song tradition. And let's hope this plays. No, it didn't play. So I will try and figure out. No, it didn't play. Maybe, Josh, you can help me with this, find where the track is, and then we'll take some Q&A in the meantime while Josh figures this one out. And I would like to really end with this song because it's beautiful.
mic's on. Thanks, Josh, for having you do 5 things at once. You got to start with John Hyde there. And say your name.
Yeah, hi, I'm John Hyde. I'm also leader of the Interfaith Study Group. And for everybody's knowledge, we had well over 200 people here on the 14th to celebrate Iftar, which is the conclusion of the fast for the day for the Muslim people. It was a great success. My question is that you talked a lot about educating women about their rights. How do you deal in a patriarchal society and educating the men about this phenomenon?
So we've been very successful through our Clubs for She initiative as well, and that is, we also use theater and the arts as a way to do that, because men have to be involved in it. That's why it's called Imams for She. Imams for She is actually a takeoff of a UN initiative called He for She, and it was basically a realization that in order for us to resolve this issue, this gender equality, throughout the world, we have to bring the boys and men on board. And so our Imam Sushi initiative does that. So for example, at our forums on education, we switch roles. Where the woman is the abuser to the men, and the man is on the receiving end of the abuses and the violence. And when I insisted on this sort of theatrical and role-playing as a way of changing hearts, truly changing, transforming individuals, the imam was really resistant, this one particular imam. But then later on he said to me, you know, Ani, 2 years later, after this, we did this first time, there was a young man that came up to me, to this imam, and said, you know what, I don't know what you all said that day 2 years ago, but that was one thing he remembered, and because it moved him. And that's key, just emotionally moving people. That's how you transform people. Next question.
I have a question. Oh,
Yeah, go ahead. Yes.
Say your name.
yeah, Nancy Mackey. Do you feel safe, you and others in your movement, from the radicals who are threatened by this?
I do feel safe here in the United States, so I don't usually disclose where I'm going to be going, but I will share with you, I'm going to Burundi. I'm really excited about that. So, but I usually don't share where I'm going to be ahead of time or what particular country I'm going to. So I'm very cautious about that, but I'm actually more worried about the political right in America, because they're gun-toting and we've got more threats from them in the last few years. And the thing about it is, you know, Homeland Security is much better at monitoring potential radical Muslims than they are of the potential radical Christian right. So, you know, so that's got to change, and I think it's starting to change because of the statistics. I mean, we've seen all this shooting, so it's evident. Before we take another question, can we do the song, Josh? All right.
Just go to the next page.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh Allah, grant me light in my heart, light in my grave, light in front of me, light behind me, light to my right and light to my left, light above me, light below me, light in my bones. Oh, Allah, increase my light everywhere. Oh, Allah, grant me light in my heart. Ameen. Ameen. Light on my skin and light in my hair,
in my flesh, light in my blood, light within myself, light on my tongue, light in my eyes, my ears, light in front of me, light behind me. Increase my light. Oh, Allah, increase my light everywhere. Oh, Allah, grant me light in my heart. Ameen. 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 Thank you. So, wait, what my rabbi friend tells me, you pronounce I mean wrong. Yes.
So I just to sort of, I wanted to just end on that. We've got like a minute, and as you have come to know All Saints and you've been in the orbit of All Saints for a while, it really strikes me that so much of what you're working with in Islam parallels the struggles in Christianity about our scriptures being used against the most vulnerable people and co-opted by empire. And what are ways that you think that we can work together, that a community like All Saints Church can support the amazing work that you're doing? What's a vision
Thank you.
for that?
Thanks, Mike. I think it's very important that churches, progressive churches and progressive institutions support the progressive voices. It's very difficult for us. We are not a well-funded group. We are very much a community grassroots organization, but we're so rooted in human rights. We don't compromise on human rights. We can't. It's not in our DNA. And I think it's very important that established institutions like All Saints support those voices that are marginalized by the orthodoxy within our institutions and within our faith. And so I think that's probably for all of us individually to do that at an individual level and in interfaith settings, because I think your voice as a non-Muslim to challenge the Muslim mindset is equally important than for us to do it within.
So if I wanted to take my phone right now and make a gift online to Muslims for Progressive Values, what would I do?
All right, you're so good. You go to mpvusa.org. I think their website is there. And then you click the donate button at the top. But you can also subscribe to our newsletter. Our newsletter is monthly, and it gives you a lot of information about the work that we do here in the United States, at the United Nations, and globally. Thank you so much.
That's great. And then it's really easy. You can do it right now. Donate to Muslim for Progressive Values. Thank you, Ani.